of developing and stuff like that. So, okay, so basically, every of these mechanisms that you can use to kind of develop your argument in like not just economical debates but other debates, but like in economics it's gonna be more useful. So let's talk about supply and demand, like at the beginning. Like people usually know, like, oh, the price is influenced by supply and demand. That's it. Like, but that can be used in a variety of debates. But basically, what is it? Like basically, the theory just says that if you left it up to the market, the scarcity of goods and the supply of goods there, in contrast with demand for that good, will make the perfect price that people are happy with. In terms of like how much people are willing to pay for this sort of thing and stuff like that. So the most important concept that influences that is scarcity of some resources and scarcity of some stuff, which means that we don't have infinite amount of materials, oil, whatever, and every good and service and price of that good necessarily impacts the price and supply of, how do you say, other goods. So for example, like whatever you want to factory produce, you do need oil, you do need gas, you do need electricity in order to do stuff. So the price is also impacted by external factors that are just quoted on the global market. How much are people willing to pay for oil? This is what you hear, oil prices have dropped or oil prices are rising and people are pissed or something like this. Mostly people are pissed because a couple of these, like, not couple, but like raw materials influence the price and management of supply of some of these things. But where this can be used is basically to identify what is the problem inside of a specific debate. Whether we're talking about housing, for example, and then people are talking about like, let's introduce rent control, like maximum amount of rent. Like there's loads of arguments that you can just derive from just thinking economically about it and thinking about, okay, so we're raising the cap, lowering the cap of rent, which means that this means that probably some people will not be willing to rent out their apartments for this low, which means that they were going to take their apartments from the market. They're either going to go to, I don't know, Airbnb, or they're going to live there, they're going to give it to a niece or a nephew or whatever to live there because it's not feasible for them to do something like this. So the fact that the price becomes lower, it's for sure good for the consumer in terms of that they're going to pay less, but it also means that me as a person who's willing to offer this service am not willing to offer it at that price, and they're just going to pull away. So this increases scarcity in the market and stuff like that, and you can claim that more people will be left without a home, even though more people can afford it under the government side. Under the outside, there will be overall less apartments that are being rented.
So, and here's the graphic interpretation of this.
Yeah, similarly, this is true for minimum wage, right? Because like minimum wage is literally supply and demand for labor cost and for labor laws. So if you introduce minimum wages, this means that there is less of a demand for workers, and there is a possibility of these workers being replaced by machines, or some businesses just not having enough money to pay for these workers, or something like this. So a lot of this stuff is influenced by, what people demand, and government tinkering within it is usually leading to some external negative factors, which doesn't mean that they don't lead to also positive stuff, which means that some people now have a living wage, but overall the trade-off is there is less jobs overall in the market, right? And this is especially important when you contrast that, like, is this clear?
Yeah,
this mechanism.
This is a question. Yeah. Maybe I misinterpreted this graph, but D stands for demand, right?
Yes.
So like, and this is quantity on the lower part.
Yeah.
So in this graph, the bigger the quantity, the lower, the bigger the demand, the lower the price is.
No, it goes the other way around. So let me explain.
The higher the price?
Yeah. So this is price, P price, and Q quantity, the amount of size. So if you are a supplier, if I'm going to rent out places, the higher the prices, so the more money I get, the more incentivized I am to offer everything, right?
So there is more quantity.
So do you think like all of you, a lot here are from like the seaside. So if the price of renting or the price of like Airbnb is higher, then more people are gonna, I don't know, like, you know, move into the one of the rooms they have in the house and like rent out the other, right? If it's more like affordable for them. And
if I, for example, offer you 10 kunas now to give me your pen that you have on your thing, some people might be willing to do so. But then if I increase it to 50, more people amongst you would be deciding, yeah, it's worth it. If I increase it to 200, all of you would be giving me give me your pen or something like that.
Right? He's actually doing it. So if anyone wants to sell,
so in this sort of scenario, like by increasing the price, I'm increasing the supply of you that you want to offer your pens to me.
And the opposite thing happens, of course, with demand, right? We are going to buy less stuff if they are more expensive, right? When stuff are expensive, like if a beer is, I know, 25 kunas, we're going to drink one and be like, yeah, this is very tasty. If it's like 10 kunas,
yes.
So this is, and this is like the normal situation. So you know, like the price is, let's say, 500, and there's, I don't know, like 1,000 flats that are being rented, blah, blah, blah. And so the government says, but this is too much, like it's more expensive for people. And they say, we're going to put it at 400, nothing can be higher than this. If you draw a line here, you see that now more people would want to have an apartment, right? Because it's cheaper. So more people would like to rent. But what happens with suppliers is less of them want to rent, right? So there's not going to be 1,000, but now there's going to be, like, let's say, 800. Right? And you have decreased the price for these 800 people. They now don't pay 500, but they pay 400. But these 200 people, they are looking for an apartment, but there's not enough apartments rented out, right? So this is like the simple cutoff point.
So that point there crossroads that is equality balance market.
That's it. Yes. So, but don't dwell on this. You're not going to run graphs when you're doing the debate. This is just an important concept to grasp in terms of how does everything work. But the second thing that is more interesting now to go into is this elasticity, and that some goods do not have, with some goods, prices can be set as high as not infinity, but like almost infinity, and people would still buy them. And these are like, how do we call them, elasticity of supply or elasticity of demand in this sort of situation. These are usually tied to the products that do not have a substitution or products that are highly addictive. So this is when we talk about, like, even though government taxes cigarettes, people still smoke, right? Because they're addicted to cigarettes and stuff like that. Even though you're paying like €5 or whatever when you go to European Union to buy cigarettes, people are still smoking. Less amount of them are smoking, but it's still, I'm more willing to tolerate higher price because I'm addicted. Similar to oil, similar to electricity and stuff like that, it's like your necessity, where you don't have an alternative. This means that prices can go as high as not humanly possible, but that's possible. So in this scenario, the government has more, wiggling power in terms of incentivizing or disincentivizing something. So this is when we talk about like, syntaxes. So that's basically a syntax, that's what you call. So like, So you put an additional tax on some things that you don't want people to spend as much on, like oil, environmental something, or cigarettes or alcohol or something like this. Versus on contrary, you do subsidies. You do subsidies in terms of when you want to incentivize the use of some of these things and competitiveness. If for example this happened, you put, I don't know, the syntaxes on butter, I can eat margarine, it would be fine. I wouldn't be that happy about it, but I would be able to eat it. But there is a substitute for that. But for example, for some of these goods, there is no substitute, which means that there is sort of tampering with it. And this is particularly important when you talk about, people wanting to tinker with it. So this is like OPEC wanting to tinker with oil prices and stuff like that. Artificially, OPEC is like the union of all like oil producing countries, not all, but like majority, like Saudi Arabia, Venezuela, and stuff like that. So they basically want to tinker with the supply and demand curve by agreeing together, like a cartel, to not, put their things on the market, so it's more scarce, so the demand gets higher in terms of, and the price gets higher because still people want it and they can't do this with it, right? So this is how like, usually these things work.
Yeah, so basically the most common example of like goods that are almost perfectly inelastic is bread to some extent, right? Because there's not a lot of substitute for bread. It's always probably the cheapest stuff, and like people can always buy it. So if the price of bread increases, people are still going to continue to buy bread, right? And there's not a perfectly perfectly elastic good, but there are goods that we consider to be a luxury, right? So if the price of like movie tickets goes up really a lot, we can do other stuff. You can buy a Netflix subscription, you can go to the theater, stuff like this. So the more the price rises, the less the people are going to like go and use these services, because people are like, look, I have the same amount of money to spend, and this like enjoyment of going to the movies now costs me more, which means I have to not do some other stuff, and people are like waiting, and they're like, well, maybe I'm gonna go to the movies less and still like continue doing all the other stuff. I don't want this price increase. Just one more, I'll ask you a question, but also a really good example of where goods can be substituted is the price of diesel and regular gas, right? So in the periods where the regular gas is more expensive, a lot more expensive than diesel, people buy diesel because they're going to save money. But recently, when diesel was the same price as gas, and diesel cars that cost 2,000 or 3,000 euros more, people buy gas cars, right? Because they're not going to save money. And these are really, really interchangeable, right? Because you can either buy a diesel car or a gas car. So this is where elasticity really works in favor of, like, people are not going to buy the good which is more expensive. Yeah.
I didn't want to ask you anything, but to give you over the best example would be coffee and tea. And if you bring the price of the coffee, no one people will switch to tea then.
So
that basically, yeah.
But we should move on. This is just the setup to the workshop. This is something that you need to understand and grasp in order for us to do a more complex sort of things. So usually the debates that are happening about the economy are either about the economic development of a certain country, what can a country do in order to develop itself, or the fight between private and governmental sector. What are the problems between governmental sector and private sector? We can do this first, private and governmental and stuff like that. And usually, and basically, the largest point here is to talk about the incentives of different actors when you talk about private sector and you talk about public sector and stuff like that. The largest issue with the public sector, and why people usually talk about it as being very inefficient, is the fact that they are not, when they're operating in a public company, like a utility company, when previously we had telecommunications company that were like Croatia Telecom or whatever, we still have Telecom Serbia or whatever. The issue is they are not operating with their own money. They're operating with the money from the budget, which means that when the company loses, they do not lose money. The government loses money in the church. So you can claim that they still have incentives to keep their jobs. But if we talk about more corrupt states, and given that these things are usually nepotistic, governments have different incentives rather than making profit from this company and maximizing utility. This can sometimes be employment. So for example, this is why Telecom Serbia has like the largest amount of employees or something like this, and why privatization will not happen, because the government doesn't want these workers laid off, even if it's bringing inefficiencies, bringing more bureaucracy to the company, making it worse off than it should actually is. The government has the incentive to keep these workers satisfied. Secondly, the profit is not used necessarily for research and development, but to be used to appease these workers as a voting body or something like this. So usually, like especially in Serbia, like if you talk about Serbia Gas or Telekom Serbia, which are the largest two companies, and EPS, all of the profit that was made, like for past couple of years, was used, not all, but like the majority of the profit was used to paid vacation, paid trips, paid manicures and salons and stuff like that. Because like if you're not operating with your own money, you might as well just treat the workers in that manner. The problem and the issue with that is, and the law sounds very good, well, who cares if they're doing that? The issue with this is that this is basically a taxpayer money, which can be used in any other subset of circumstances, like hospitals, like education, like anything else that can be used is not used, and it's used for inefficiencies of this governmental body. So you're losing money on somebody where there is more vulnerable people who need this money in the first place in these sort of situations. That's usually the problem with the incentives of the government or something. Versus comparatively incentives, the problematic things about the incentives of the companies, they have the incentive to maximize profits, which usually means like minimizing the amount that they pay their workers, minimizing the conditions and stuff like that. But then again, the positive thing is they also have the incentive to operate the company at the maximum capacity of the efficiency and stuff like that to be most competitive, because if the company goes under, their own money goes under in this sort of situation. So the first subset of situations in the economy would be called moral hazard, in terms of when somebody else is taking a risk of the thing that you're doing, you're much more likely to take that risk yourself. For example, if during the 2008 crisis and stuff like that, banking crisis, if people believed, and they did, banks believed, the government is going to be there to bail them out, to give them money if they fail, they're much more likely to behave more riskily with that money and to just do not care as much about the risk, because they know that someone is going to cover it or something like this. And this is what led to like more reckless behavior than it needed to happen. Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, so a couple of other points, and these are usually, there's a lot of debates about privatization and nationalization of different industries and stuff like this, is that oftentimes you can argue that with privatization you get a foreign influence on your economy. And what is that? Probably these are going to be like foreign-owned company, oftentimes multinational corporations, and sure, like that they have their bad sides. But one of the good sides is that you are going to get exposed to international competition. So the comparative is like if you're Telecom Serbia, you don't have, I mean, you probably don't talk to other telecoms as much as after this. If you're part of Croatian Telecom, you have bosses in Deutsche Telekom, which means that some of the good practices that might have developed in Bulgaria, or some of the good practices that have been doing for the past 20 years, are also then slowly applied in your country as well, right? Which means that you have this synergy, you have managers who come from different parts of the world, who are probably more educated, who then come to your country, and then like your workers and your people acquire these skills, and they, in general, they rise on the level of like the human capital they have and stuff like this. One example that's not related to this specifically was the idea of like when Apple decided to make iPhones in China and they manufactured them there. At some point they decided to close one plant because it was becoming more expensive to run, and to move it to Vietnam. So what the Chinese did is they simply took all of the people who were working there and they made new companies for doing phones, because these people in the status quo were already aware and they had the know-how of how to do phones, and then they could create their own company which then produced cell phones and stuff like this. The know-how, like how these people were taught to produce phones and stuff like this, was something that Apple initially like taught them, and they went through training and gave them like all this sort of different stuff and stuff like this. So this is something that can be helpful, especially in markets where you otherwise would not have, for example, like foreign experts and stuff like this, because no one wants to probably go and like work for a state company, and the state company does not have the incentive to employ someone from the outside as well, right? Because it can come under public pressure. Ooh, you are paying this guy like 15,000 euros, and he wants 15,000 euros. Private companies do not have this burden. They can justify to their shareholders why they're paying this guy so much and stuff like this. So you get more foreign exposure to this, and then presumably, like, you will get better by this and stuff like this. The similar way as if you were doing just tournaments in, I don't know, like Croatia, and then if you go outside and you get all sorts of like different judges and stuff like this, you learn new stuff, you see how people interact in different ways, you may hear some arguments that people make that you would never make with your like local guys and stuff like this, so you grow large, in, not only like in terms of like money efficiency and stuff like this, but also in terms of know-how, the management strength and stuff like this, which is very important sometimes for countries who are lacking in this.
But a crucial point to just move on is to figure out that the economy, and the most important thing about the economy, is that it's based on risk. Some people are risking their money, hence investing, and hence it pays off or it doesn't pay off in terms of that. So that's how full the economy works, basically based on a management of risk or something like this. So that's that's tied with the economical development of a country, but it's also tied with, how do you say, how companies internally are developing, how the West is developing and stuff like that. It's all about the management of risk. And what can be risk? What are all of the things that can be risk? And you can write it down as well. Risk. So basically, as I said, risk is like, what is the chance of me losing this money when I invest it? Because if I invest it, it might not pan out, might not be able to get back that money. Also, if I loan somebody the money, I also might not get that back. So that there is risks involved. One is political. Let's talk about that. No. Okay. So one is political. Which is to say, what policies and what politics does to the country influences the amount of risk.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I can ask you the same question. I need a phone charger, if it's not a problem. I'm sorry.
What type?
Regular type. It's old type. I mean.
Old type. I don't have old type. Yes. Okay.
Oh, sorry. I know it's another.
By the way, since you already asked, could I get the USB-C?
Where would you put it?
There's an outlet here, right?
Okay, so let's go back to that. So we talked about political risk. Can you think of an example of political risk?
No.
Political risk.
Making controversial policy or law alienating your voter base.
Okay.
Let's say,
no, but this is more targeted towards, so look, just imagine the risk from the perspective of I am the investor. It's risky for me what that country does.
Yes, the risk is that if we grow in power, some political parties may not be happy about it, and they wanted to shut us or become part of it. They are going to try to convince us to become a part of it.
Okay, what do you want to say?
We need to look at the stability of the country, because if they impose tariffs to the rest of the world, or the rest of the world imposes sanctions on them, then the company basically collapses.
So political parties can offer some policies that can be detrimental to your investment, right? This can be tariffs. This can be like protectionism, this can be, how do you say, nationalizing of industries like Venezuela and stuff like that. All of these can be detrimental to my investment, and hence the risk of this scenario happening is included in my decision whether I am going to invest or not, and right, in this sort of situation. So I'm making a decision based on, first of all, what political party is currently in power, but secondly, what political parties can be in power. What is the possibility? Is there a rise in left-wing populism? Is there a rise in far-right populism? What is happening? Is there like a threat to the stability of the country in this sort of situation that influences my decision whether I will invest or not? So this is how political debates about like what will we do about policies and stuff like that can be turned into the economic debates, because if you increase the political risk, this necessarily then leads to less investments overall in the country, or less, how we say, money in the country in the first place, right? So that's one. So let's then talk about the second one, which is also, has the same word, which is geopolitical.
So while you write it, the example of this in Croatia would be that GVZ gathers more and more support, and then like foreign investors are less prone to investing because they fear that Croatia is going to become less open, maybe exit European Union, and like close down banks, impose additional like change in policy towards like international businesses operating in the country.
Second one is geopolitical. What does your country do? Is there a country in war with somebody? Does your country have a good allies or something like this? Does your country on bad sides of, I don't know, America or China or something like this? These are all the risks that somebody can fuck you over, close the how do you say, if we are in bad relations with the EU, for example, if Serbia was in bad relations with the EU, one of the risks would be closing of the borders between us and some of the countries. But given that we are not, then the European Union forced me to open it again. No, but then again, no, but the factor and the fact is what is this geopolitical stability of the country? Is it in a heat of like in a war zone? Is it how do you say strategically important for some players? Is China interested? For example, this is very good. For example, for some countries, like even for Serbia, if we talk about that, China being interested into investing in these countries might mean that this is like how do you say signals that this is going to be more stable because like China will want to protect their investment inside of their country. They're a large multinational company there. This also means that there is a vested interest from other sides to keep this stable, or vice versa. Is there a competitor there or something like that? So
to characterize this, let's say that there's a country who is going to be under the threat of possibly international sanctions. If you open up a firm there and you make money, there's no way for you to get that money back in your country, right? Because all of the financial transactions between countries are going to stop if they are going to become under international sanctions. So the risk of your investment is I am maybe going to make money in Iran, but I'm going to be stuck with a lot of Iranian money and I'm not going to be able to spend it outside of Iran, right? And you presumably, once you do this source of investment, you want to get the money back to your home country and then make new investments, blah, 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 right? So at the point where right now it's not certain what's going to happen with the Iranian deal, the nuclear weapons, you probably have heard about this, and like whether their sanctions are going to be lifted or not, there's less people who are willing to invest in Iran. Because the rationale is, I can probably do the same investment in Kazakhstan, and I'm going to go there more likely because they are not under the threat of sanctions as Iran is, right? The third one would probably be like regulatory risk. And this is very simple. So regulations oftentimes change, and they can change for worse for you, right? So let's think of it in the perspective of an oil company. If you're an oil company and you want to drill somewhere, and then suddenly this country changes its laws towards like protection of animals, sea, stuff like this, and they make your production 30% more expensive, right? They say you cannot use these like plastic shit anymore, you have to use some like recyclable ones, and they are like 20%, 30% more expensive. This because of these regulations, your initial investment is something that's in trouble, right? Because when you made the investment in the beginning, you were like, this is how much I need to pay, this is for how much I can sell the product or service, and this is my return. And then when the costs go up, because the regulations have changed, no, it's different than political and, well, you can say that is also political risk or something, but also more specifically, even without. So political risk would be the risk of the political situation not turning in your favor. But let me give you an example of why this is not the same to regulatory risk. Because in Croatia, no matter how the political situation develops, oftentimes we are like in international investors and stuff like this. There's the regulatory, like bureaucratic risk, right? That our taxes go up and down. That there's not like you cannot get clear services in like when you ask for help from the government or stuff like this. So this is something that does not change with political parties. This is something that stays, and this can be classified as like regulatory risk.
Okay, and the actual third, the third risk is economic one. So it's based on how is your economy.
The actual word. The word is economic. Booyah.
Booyah. Booyah. So how is your economy structured? What is it based on? Is it based on, how do you say, natural resources, or is it based on service economy? So all of these things can be, how do you say, viewed depending on what sector do you want to join, as some kind of a risk. If, for example, you are based in a country which is very rich with natural resources, then opening up a business, how do you say, a synergy of a business or that will profit from that natural resources diminishes the risk and decreases the risk. Whilst if you're in a country that has nothing in terms of economy, or if there's nothing in terms of economy, in terms of natural resources, the risk of, how do you say, the risk of your investment is higher. The risk of this price of goods, how do you say, rising suddenly is higher, or something like that. Similarly, if your economy is diversified or not diversified, which means that if your economy is based around one thing or based around multiple things, which means that if it's based around one thing, there is a much larger chance of recession, of horrible things. And if recession happens, all of your products inside of that country, if you open the factories of Coca-Cola, this means that less people will buy Coca-Cola because they have less money. So there are economical risks tied to that. So the investors cared about two things. So one is risk, that I told you, and second one is premium. So this is why people are willing to tolerate, how do you say, to tolerate this risk. In terms of, because I will get some more money, so my money will be multiplied in some way, whether I'll get 1%, 2%, or 3% or something like this. So these two things are interacted with each other. So if you have a high risk, you need to offer high premium for somebody to be willing to come. If you just have a high risk and low premium, nobody's going to come, or very, very little people are going to come. So one of the things that are influenced by premiums are, like, first of all, the interest rate. So how much money am I paying for the money that you borrowed me? How do you say, return of investment, like year on year, yearly. Over how many years you will have to pay something off?
Payback period.
Yeah, payback period.
You guys know what the interest rate is, right?
Yeah. Come on.
Well, I know you know, like, in terms of, like, maybe English, this is
three, like, and one of the things that's influenced, conditions.
So, payback period one of the conditions in that case.
No, but no, more in terms of conditions of, will you, if I come to your country, and your country is very risky, yeah, let me, how do you say, fire half of the people in the factory, or let me pollute more, or let me, what will you give to me in order for me to come in this sort of situation? So conditions on my loan. It can be also like change some things in your government for me to how do you say, want to come.
So these things are often used to mitigate or remove these things. So one of the conditions could be taxes stay the same for me for the next 10 years, right? So you negotiate that while you are doing the investment, and then the regulatory risk is very low for the next 10 years, right? It can also be in terms of economic risks. You might have a risk that you need some resource. For example, like if you're going to drill oil, you need a lot of water in order to wash off the stuff and stuff like this. So you make a condition, you as the government that I'm coming into, you guarantee me that I'm going to have a supply of water all the time. And they say, sure, okay, this is the price, we're going to guarantee the price over the next 10 years. And then no one can say, oh, now you're going to pay double the amount, right? So these are all the stuff that mitigate these.
So these are, basically you can boil it down to three main points, which is ecology, how much I can pollute, or how much I can deteriorate the environment, workers' rights, in terms of how much can I pay my workers and stuff like that, taxes, and like inside of the sub point of taxes would also be subsidies that I would get for hiring a missionary worker or something like this, right? So these are the mechanisms that countries should do, and usually in debates, you should just think, how does this policy influence either the risk or the premium in this sort of situation? If it lowers the risk, this usually means that countries will get better loans, and this will be lower. So interest rates will be lower, payback period will be better and conditions will be better for your country if the risk is lower. If this motion increases risk, simultaneously this increases, how do you say, the interest rate, increases the payback period, and it deteriorates the conditions. So this is basically how these levers are pulled, and you always need to think when you get an economics motion, how does this influence on risk, and then simultaneously, how does this, how do you say, and how would you connect this influence on risk? But like, let's talk about like, how is risk being calculated? First of all, that's one of the more important things. It's not as, how do you say, mathematically precise as people think. It's not like you can calculate 100% certainty this is the amount of risk that exists and this is like a true fact. It's more along the lines of what do people believe the trends are going to continue. And obviously there are more academics that are studying, how do you say, that are studying geopolitics and stuff like that. They're studying political situation, they're studying the economy, which can tell you stuff like that. But it still boils down to some premises and some stuff that we are guessing and are not certain about in the end. Which means that, for example, even though economical situation, political situation in Japan is that they have like more than 230% of their GDP in debt and stuff like that, and their debt crisis is like going through the roof, people still want to invest there because it's perceived that Japan is probably going to stay afloat. Japan is probably still going to be good, whilst simultaneously, even though Greece had a smaller percentage of debt to GDP rate, just creditors were like, no, just give us back our money now or something else. So it's about the perception of how will the country look like. It's not necessarily based on holistic numbers, it's about the perception and the logic, like the argumentation of why America can continue to borrow even if they're borrowing them to like they're burying themselves in debt or something like this. So usually you can talk about like why perceptions of some countries will change. So for example, if you get a motion of quarterfinals motion that IMF, International Monetary Fund, should take control of countries' monetary policy when they get the loan or something like this. One of the main arguments there, like because everybody's going to fight whether they're going to do a good job or they're going to do a bad job. But one of the ways to completely outframe that is to be, I don't care if they're going to do a good or bad job. We think at least they're going to do a pretty similar on par job. What does change is the perception that everybody would believe that IMF is doing a better job than the random government that failed previously, right? Which means that then they think that risk is lower and then they want to invest more. So this is a completely argument that is not conditional on whether they are actually going to do a good job, but basically what people would believe the good job will be done or something like this, and that increases and impacts all these things, and then you run that argument. Do you understand how did I connect these things? Okay?
The risk.
Yes. So, but the crucial point, and why are we even talking about this, is if you want to develop as a country, you have a select amount of money in your country, money, resources, and stuff like that. If you want to develop and if you want to become richer, you need somebody else's money to come into your own country, right? Or something like that. So you need to create value in that direction. So the only way for you to develop is through foreign direct investment, or if you land on a gold mine and then you can sell gold, but like mostly through foreign direct investment. So this is why this is the most important thing if you talk about the developing economy, about that. So what else?
You guys have questions about this? Right, we can talk about some other like concepts.
Let's talk about inflation. Let's talk about central banks in general.
Okay. So what's your perception of like what do central banks do? What's their job?
They are running currency, their currency,
They're trying to keep the exchange rate of the currency the same.
So there's two policies in the country. One is monetary, second one is fiscal policy. And people usually mix these two together and think they're completely interchanged. Fiscal policy is basically the economic policy that you do for your own country. This is like, I want to invest in roads and infrastructure, or I want to deregulate the market. These are the policies that government do in order to increase the economy. Monetary policy is just focused on the amount of money that is in the the economy at that point, which is focused on curbing two things. One of them influencing inflation, and second of all, influencing the interest rates and credit, how much money will be given there in this sort of situation. That very interesting thing that in comparison to all of the others, and a very cool thing why democracy is usually not absolute. For example, monetary policy is a technocratic body almost in every country, which means that it's operated not by elected officials, but by people who are experts in their field. Specifically because not knowing what you're doing in that scenario, and like even increasing stuff by 0.01% can have a huge spiral effect on the whole economy, which means that it's needed to be done by people who are knowledgeable. This is a very cool thing, how you can present that we already don't have an absolute democracy and stuff like that, even though we value democracy in some manners. But like other than this, like it's very crucial for these bodies to be independent and to be, how do you say, stable. So
also another reason is that you don't want governments to pressure central banks to, for example, like lower interest rates just before elections. So economy goes in a boom and they're like, oh, look at this, we're doing very well, and then screw up the economy, right? Which is what happened in the past. So you want central banks to be as independent as possible from the politicians, from politics, from the cycle and stuff like this. But,
so,
yeah, what do you want to say?
Currency. Let's talk about what currency is.
Well, maybe start with interest rates and like the mechanism of inflation, and then currency.
But I think currency is precondition for all of that. You need to know how much money is your money worth in comparison to the other money.
Okay, start with currency.
So, basically, currency and the whole economy of the world is based on like the small economies of each state that is operated under one currency and under one monetary policy. Usually, it's decided who is the winner of that, but like the international like exchange rate and stuff like that. So you cannot ever influence directly the exchange rate in terms of setting it. I want the exchange rate for kuna and euros to be 1 to 6, and that's it. So that's what, for example, Maduro tried to do, and it just leads to people not willing to take that and go into the black market and stuff like that because it's not worth it that much. But the way that, how do you say, currency are operated is basically by desirability of your currency. So how many people want to buy stuff from your how do you say, state? It means how much your currency will be valuable in comparison to the other currency. So if, for example, suddenly Croatia got a huge boom in, I don't know, finding whatever resource or whatever, your currency would skyrocket in comparison to, for example, Serbian dinar, because it will be more desirable to own kunas than dinars. Okay. So this is based on people's perception of what do they want to buy and what do they want to do with this money. So
that's something maybe to like give a closer example to. That's something that happens all the time during the summer when there's a tourist season in Croatia, right? Because a lot of these people, they want to exchange their currencies for the Croatian kuna, and the demand for Croatian kuna then is really, really high, right? But why doesn't the exchange rate changes from winter to summer only a little bit, right? Like it goes from 7.5 to maybe 7.3. So why is it like this? The change is very small, and there's like literally millions of people who are spending like thousands and thousands of kunas during the summer, and the demand is higher than during the winter. Is because the Croatian National Bank offsets this, right? So in the summer, Croatian National Bank sells kunas to other banks, so to Zaba, Zagrebačka banka, Credit Bank, and blah, 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 so that they can then distribute this to like exchange offices and that people can buy kunas. And in the winter, it buys kunas, right? So this is not maybe as important as an example. Maybe it's important because you live in Croatia, so you should know that anyway. The idea is important as a mechanism of how central banks actually affect the market. So here's the rate. Here's 10 kunas and 5 kunas, and this is summer. So like let's say this period. So kuna would be somewhere here during the summer, and then in the winter it would go like this, right? It would fluctuate a lot, right? Because a lot of tourists want to buy kuna, so kuna becomes stronger, as Miloš explained the mechanism, and then in the summer it's 5. Then in the winter, no one fucking needs kunas. Like, why would you need kunas in the winter? There's no tourists. So the price then again, demand goes down, the price goes up. So what the central bank does, it does something like this. Right? So in the winter, when the demand is very low, they want to buy kunas and they increase the demand. And in the summer, when the demand is very high, they sell kunas and they increase the demand. And that's why in the end, you have like 7.5, 7.3, and it's called a snake in the tunnel, right? Because they sell a tunnel and then it can move like this, but it's always in a tunnel, that's why it's snake in the tunnel.
Yes. That is crucially important. The only reason why this is important is because large fluctuations in the currency, even if it gets stronger, impacts other parts of the economy. So just because there is a tourist season and people want to buy this, the change in, how they say, the stronger the currency gets, means that your agriculture would be fucked for some time, because it would be, you would, how do you say, for $1 you can buy less, I don't know, strawberries than you could, I don't know, in winter time, right, or something like this. So the issue is, when the currency is stronger, and this is why China, for example, doesn't want their currency to rise and to be strong, and developing countries with export-based countries do not really want their currency to be very strong, because if the currency gets very strong, and if the currency gets strong, I have my competitors who have a weaker currency, and if I say that for $1 I can buy 3 Chinese pens, and then yen rises, because like, I don't know, and then yen rises, and then after yen rises, I can buy 2 Chinese pen, but the rate for Thailand pens or whatever stays 1 to 3. I'm just gonna move to Thailand and buy from them, because I can buy more stuff for the same amount of money for my dollar or something like this. So given that you want to, I don't know, depends on that. I want to export to America. I do want to keep my currency not necessarily the lowest possible, but lower in order to develop in some certain way in this sort of situation. So this is also the way to possibly not develop, but like try to develop and influence the currency. This is where we go to the next concept, which is inflation, which is very good.
So inflation is generally something that is the most afraid of thing of the central bank for a couple of reasons.
Not necessarily. I mean, hyperinflation, yes. But
yeah, so like the bad inflation. Usually, like central banks have some sort of like a target of inflation. Inflation, as per definition, is the change in the value of money, or like the decrease in value of money. So, which means that, for example, if the inflation rate is 2% per year, then this pen, if it costs 100 kuna this year, the next year it's going to cost 102 kunas, right? You all know this, like, so the prices that increase are because of the inflation of this. And central banks are very afraid of inflation becoming too big, because if the inflation becomes too big, if it develops into hyperinflation, then all sorts of different mechanisms in the economy are simply bust, and they do not do very well. The first one is investments, we talked about before. So if the inflation rate is very big, then your initial investment loses value, right? Because like you do not get compensated for this inflation. Second is that prices rise on a big level, right? From month to month. This is something that happened in Croatia like in the 90s. That's happening in Venezuela right now. You're seeing people like carrying like suitcases of money, and they cannot buy bread with this, right? So the cash that's circulating in the industry is somehow becoming less valuable. People are afraid that this is going to continue, so that's why they psychologically increase the process by itself, because it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you
it increases the risk.
Yeah, it increases the risk of your economy and stuff like this. Because note that money is nothing but
a belief in the value of money.
So the paper that you have in your like wallets and stuff like this, the only way it works is that someone else is going to accept it, because they know they can do something with it. There's no inherent value.
So, for example, there is no inherency in, how do you say, economic crisis. Economic crisis is created by the lack of trust and belief. So for example, if nobody, so if there's supposed to be an economic crisis and then nobody reacts, nobody pools their money, everybody continues doing the same stuff as they did previously, nothing would happen. But just that race to, oh, let me pool away my money first so I don't lose money, I don't care if you lose money, that triggers you also doing that, means that it's a spiral and it stumbles down. It's similar with inflation and stuff like that. So even though inflation can be sometimes positive, in terms of like also necessary in order to increase the value, to track the value that is increasing in a society, but also to try to attract more people who want to come there. It's still very dangerous and risky because like the perception that this is going to continue, is going to fall, might be very detrimental to your economy overall in this situation. So I think, and one of the most important things is to control and have a stable, percentage of inflation in the country. So,
and central banks usually do this via, well, nowadays they use different methods, but usually via the interest rate mechanism. Now, I can explain this now. I'll try to be as clear as possible. This is useful in debates about central banks because it's the most inherent mechanism that you're going to have. Right?
It's very easy though.
Huh?
It's very easy to explain.
The inflation versus interest rate.
Yes.
Okay, you do it.
Okay. So the interest rate, you know, the credit, what the credit is, right? Like we told you, kamata interest rate. So the way to control the interest rate and the way that the central bank does it is to try to incentivize either borrowing of money or keeping of money, or like either saving money or borrowing money to people. And how do they do it? So if you put money in the bank currently, if you were to put 100 dinars, they would give you some interest rate. Keep it there for 2 years, and you will get like 2% or something, right? But there is a risk if you give it to a random bank that the bank fails, and we felt it. Dafina in 99, in Serbia. So if banks fail, you can lose your money. The most secure place to keep your money is the central bank, because central bank, if the government doesn't fall, the central bank will still be alive. So that's literally zero risk of keeping your money into the central bank, which means that central bank can virtually offer an interest rate to other banks and say, look, keep your money at my place and we'll give you 2% interest rate or something like this. So this means that that there is impossible for any bank to give a lower interest rate to other people when they borrow than 2%, because they have the least risky investment they can get for 2%. So they will never give credit for 1%. It can only be above 2% to all of the other people. So that's the only way how they do it. Which means that if they want to reduce the inflow of money in order to control inflation, to create scarcity of dollars, they would just increase this and say, we're going to give you 5%, which means more banks are less likely to lend out the money, which means there's less money in circulation, which curbs the inflation in the end. Or vice versa, if you want to incentivize more spending and stuff like that, you would put this interest rate of the central bank at 0%. And then this means that it can be as low as 1% or something like this. So you want to incentivize people handling cash. One is being done to curb inflation. The second is being done to curb the economic crisis that is happening and the recession.
And just we're going to wrap up with this thing, unless you're going to have a question. So the important piece of mechanism that's not easy to explain here is why, if the interest rate is lower, and presumably you can assume that people are then going to take out more loans, right? Because it's cheaper to take out loans. Why does this affect the economy or not? Right? How does this affect economic growth?
Because there's more money in circulation. So it has less value.
So it has
less value because there's more of it.
But there's more of it, which means more stuff is being done, more money is changing hands, more people, more business, more people get their salary, there is increased demand of, I don't know, cucumber, so more people produce cucumber. So simultaneously, while that is true, it also incentivizes the business side of things, because there is more money to circulate, which means there is more money for people to buy an apartment. So when that guy buys an apartment, the guy who sold the apartment has more money to spend on something else. So it incentivizes in other ways the economy and stuff like that. It basically makes it fluctuate and circle a bit more, and that's like a positive and good thing. So two things before we wrap up. They're just one-off things. It's very important to think about patents. So the one way and the only way to incentivize people to invest money in research and development is to allow them to patent the stuff, which means, you know what patent is, right? Patent, like you get 10 years or 20 years of you being the only one who can, how do you say, exploit money from a certain technology or something like this. So it's very risky for you, and this is the greatest thing, it's very risky. The risk with patents is, first of all, that somebody else finds the patent before you, so you're both researching at the same time and somebody finds it, which means that you wasted all of the money that you did, you're never getting it back. Second of all, that you never don't find the thing that you don't. So one of the statistics is that for every one pharmaceutical patent that you get passed, hundreds get denied and fail, which means that for every one drug that is out there, means that hundreds of them are just nothing, and there's money that you will never get in return, or something like this. So this means that like the value of this in the debates where it happens is basically, is this, how do you say, are the patents making them research more and give like rich people give money into the causes where after 10 or 20 years we will all have like the access to, but we will have to tolerate 10 years of horrible pricing and like very high prices. Is that worth it? Like the finding of these drugs versus the inequality that it creates and like horrible pricing conditions and stuff like that. But like if you, for example, limit the patent or remove the patent or price range in the patent, this all disincentivizes, it creates less money into the research and development from the private sector in this sort of situation, which will then lead to less chances of developing a drug, less chances of developing technology or something like this. This is usually, and there exists some of these, how do you say, things. In the thing, lastly, just the, how do you say, economy of scale as a method. This means that it's usually if you like, if I bought right now, how do you say, pizza oven or whatever, and it costs 500 euros, the cost of producing my first pizza in that oven would be 500 euros. That would be the most expensive pizza yet. But the benefit is that every time I make a new pizza, I have made a return on my investment or something like this. Which means that as much of these, like, how do you say, machinery technology you can have, you are reducing the cost and the fixed cost of, how do you say, your investment or something. Where is this relevant or something like this? One of the debates, for example, is if you had, and you probably had this debate, if you, or at least heard, like in public, whether we should give welfare to people by like giving them goods and services rather than giving them money itself. One of the good arguments there is if the government can be the one who is producing the stuff or the one who is actually buying it wholesale, you're cutting off the middleman, you're cutting off the margin that other people are getting. So this means you can provide more goods with the economy of scale to people and give them like, it's not going to be the best quality, it's not going to be the best, but you can provide them quantitatively more things. And this is also the reason why big companies who have money to invest, in the expensive technology can always outclass the small, how do you say, producers. This is how Netherlands Netherlands have had their agriculture be the best, how do you say, the best in the world, or like, at least in Europe, specifically because the cost of one huge company owning a huge plot of land and then being able to invest in a huge part of technology, and that being done by Lovro the farmer is like completely different. Like Lovro the farmer cannot do this, was the how do you say, big company investing in technology means that they can operate under this economy of scale and lower the prices for everybody else. And why is this good? Because it lowers the prices for consumers. So even though you lose some jobs in this situation, overall it's cheaper to eat food.